So before we go into the first session, just a few comments about space. Within this samsaric domain, within our conditioned existence, the most primal type of space, at least in the Dzogchen tradition, is the substrate. So you know about this when your mind is dissolved into this continuum. And in fact, the substrate consciousness itself in deep dreamless sleep, non-lucid dreamless sleep, or when you're under general anesthesia, or when you've fainted, or when you're at the dead point in the dying process, you have become dead. On those occasions, then when it's non-lucid, the substrate consciousness actually, in a manner of speaking, dissolves into substrate. So you're not explicitly aware of anything at all. If you're under general anesthesia, you don't know anything at all. So you have more consciousness than a glass of water, which doesn't have a pilot light. If we go back to that metaphor, it doesn't have a pilot light. There's nothing you can do to it to make it wake up. Whereas hopefully you do come out of anesthesia and so on. So when you're there, the nature of the substrate, it said its essential nature is of unknowing or avidya, because you just don't know anything. But I wouldn't say that the glass of water doesn't know anything. I would say it's a categorical error to talk about it not knowing anything, because the words don't even apply. There's nothing it can ever do to become knowing. Whereas when you're resting in the substrate, you're resting in a state of unknowing. And it's said that it obscures. The substrate, of course, is a relative truth, which means it fully obscures something. Gunzop, or samritti. It totally obscures. That's the nature of conventional reality, or relative reality altogether. But specifically, the substrate is obscuring a deeper reality. Right? Any guesses what that deeper reality might be? Amy? Good guess. Not quite on, but yeah, good guess. Mm-hmm. Any other guesses? Yeah, Dharma Dhatu, exactly. Yeah. The substrate consciousness, being a samritti, a type of reality that totally obscures another one, that would be the one that would be kind of a perfect match, the substrate consciousness. As long as you're embedded in that, as long as you're enmeshed in that, as long as you're identifying with that, that's obscuring the deeper reality, which is right there. Again, it's not one floor down or someplace else and there's a wall in between. It's right where the substrate consciousness is. It's nowhere else. And likewise, right where the substrate is, that's where the Dharma Dhatu, ultimate reality, Dhammata, that's where it is. But it obscures that which is, in a manner of speaking, hidden in plain sight. But then those karmic energies stir, or vasanas, kind of these imprints of the mind, they stir, and substrate consciousness emerges from the substrate. And then I think I went through this sequence before, it's straight from the Vajra essence. And from the substrate consciousness, if this waking up process continues, coming from deep dreamless sleep to the waking state, from the substrate emerges the substrate consciousness. From the substrate consciousness, this catalyzes the klishta-manas, this primal sense of I am, this pre-articulate, preconceptual kind of coagulation of a sense of me over here and space over there. It's a really raw, primitive bifurcation of experience into subject and object. But then that catalyzes a subtle mentation or manas. And this is where we start to distinguish, but in a preconceptual way. Not yet caught up in thought, but starting just to be able to distinguish like hot and cold, or color from sound. Really raw, very primitive. And so, but now with that, and then the coarse mentation that occurs, which then is embedded in conceptualization. Here's what seems to happen. I think it's a very close interpretation to what Padmasambhava says in the Vajra essence and elsewhere. And that it's, in a manner of speaking, I'll use a little bit of an analogy here, that this primal space of the substrate, when mentation arises, mentation is that which discerns, distinguishes, separates. So it's as if this kind of primal, raw, foundational samsaric space gets refracted. And it's just like light passing through a prism and gets refracted. then this primal space of the substrate gets refracted into 6 spaces. Space of the mind, which the substrate already is, but now is a space of the mind in which thoughts are arising and images and memories and so forth and so on. And then, of course, 5 other types of space, the visual, the auditory, and so forth. So it's mentation, rooted in, preceded by a sense of I am, that refracts space itself into subspaces, and then refracts the substrate consciousness into the flow of mental consciousness, of which we're very well aware right now, as well as the 5 sensory modes. So the substrate seems to be refracted into 5 types of domains, 6 I should say, and the substrate consciousness into 6 corresponding modes of consciousness. And so now we bring this right to experience. Oh, and then after coarse mentation, then comes in the whole field of memory, thought, personal identity, and so forth, and then it's just normal consciousness. But in the falling asleep process, it follows the same reverse route. And in the formation of an embryo, it follows that route from the substrate right through to having a human mind. And when you die, there's a symmetry, again going from the human mind dissolving right back into substrate. Okay. The variability there is whether you're lucid or not. You might come into this world, if you're highly realized tulku, you might come in lucid and just be through the whole process lucid. And if you're lucid, you know, if you've accomplished something, then as you're dying, you may go right through lucid in that way as well, which would be a great boon. But we're coming close to the meditation now. And so, when we are attending to the space of the body, number 1, tactile perception, tactile consciousness, one of the 6, has the sensory, the somatic field, tactile field, at its domain. It owns it, right? It owns it. So with our tactile perception, we experience hot, cold, motion, and so forth, the 4 elements, also the different types of feelings, pleasure, pain, and indifference within the somatic field. All right. But now, as we'll do for roughly the first half of the session, which will be silent, so I'm going to front load the session, what I would suggest for the first half is that we take the space of the body and whatever arises within it as the object. So we're familiar with this by now. But this means we're directing mental consciousness. It jumps out of its field. It's not, of course, it's the one that gets loose. Tactile never goes into visual. Visual never goes into auditory. They're stuck. Mental has a kind of a Ural pass. You know, it can just go anywhere, anywhere. I look over at Diana, there she is. So my mental consciousness is then going into my visual field. If I should tap her on the shoulder and be aware of doing so, being attending, hi Diana, and I touch her on the shoulder, then mental is going to the tactile sensation, and so on, right? So when we are, as we will for the first half of the session, we'll bring the full force, as well as we can, single-pointedly focus mental consciousness on the somatic field and whatever arises within it. Then there are 2 types of consciousness operating there, but this means there's 2 types of space as well. There's the tactile space, there's also the relative dharma dhatu. Remember, out of 18 dhatus, 18 domains, the relative dharma dhatu is simply the domain of experience that is apprehended by mental consciousness. Okay? So the limited mental space is what's left over when you're dreaming. Right? And those are just mental events. Or when you're single-pointedly focusing on settling the mind in its natural state, you're focusing on this subset of mental space which is populated by simply mental events. Right? So that's single-pointed. But now, when the mental consciousness moves over to the tactile field, then the tactile field, that domain, is now coextensive with the mental, the dhamma dhatu. Because mental consciousness is aware of everything that's happening in the tactile. So you have 2 spaces kind of superimposed upon each other. Right? Now, this can be a skillful means. This is a bit theory there. But in this retreat, theory is always for the sake of practice. That's my motivation. I don't talk about just stuff, give us intellectual entertainment. So as we spend the first half of this session focusing on the space of the body and whatever arises within it, what I'm inviting you to do is to let your dhamma dhatu, the domain of literally a phenomena, but here dharma or phenomena refers specifically to phenomena apprehended by mental consciousness. Right? Well, that's actually everything. Emptiness, elementary particles, feelings, thoughts, the fragrance of roses and so forth. All of these can be objects of mental consciousness, right? So they're all dharmas, which means they're phenomena, and the domain of mental consciousness is the dharma dhatu. Well, your dharma dhatu is now melting into or merging with the space of the body, right? And what I'm inviting you to do, as a preparation for settling the mind in its natural state, is let the space of your mind, which is now coextensive with space of the body, I mean pretty much, apart from wandering thoughts and noise, but single-pointedly focusing on that you're letting the space of your mind, your dharma dhatu, which is the focus of your attention, be filled with this, and this is the critical point, this non-conceptual space. Because thoughts don't arise in the somatic field. Tactile sensations do, feelings, pleasure, pain, and difference, yes. But do thoughts occur in the kneecap? Or in the region of your belly? Or your heart? And the answer is no. Tactile sensations, yes. And so by letting the space of your mind, which is now focused and selective, you could have gone to auditory, you could have gone to the uniquely mental domain, where thoughts are. But we've chosen, as a preliminary exercise, to focus the mental consciousness, which means it brings with it its mental domain, merge that with the somatic. The somatic is non-conceptual. The idea here is to fill your mental domain with non-conceptual sensations, which kind of relief. So it fills it. It fills it. And you non-conceptually are aware of non-conceptual sensations arising in the space. It's again filling the glass full of water, putting a cap on it, and then sucking all the water out to create a vacuum. We're filling the space of your mind with just the space of the body and non-conceptual sensations. Give it some space, get it to quiet down, get it to empty out of all the noise that my space of the mind is normally filled with. And fill it instead with non-conceptual, non-chatty tactile sensations. Solidity, moisture, heat, motility. Then we've gotten some peace and quiet. A little bit. Then, okay, ready to launch. And then you direct your attention to the space of the mind. And now you have a better chance of not being sucked into every thought and image and memory and so forth that comes up. Because you've kind of rested. And so it's less density, less overwhelming. Rather than being in a waterfall and being thrown over the cliff with the water, is rather like standing on the edge, on the ground, right next to a mountain brook, and watching the water flow by, rather than being a leaf carried downstream. Okay, that's kind of the idea. It's strategy, it's skillful means. Okay? So, more or less first half, focusing on the space of the body, whatever sensations, but with a special emphasis, bit of selectivity on those nice, rhythmic, soothing, predictable sensations of the in and out breath, the respiration. Do that for a while. Big emphasis, relaxation and stillness. That's what mindfulness of breathing is really good for. So soothing, it's almost like getting a massage, like something very regular, just kind of like a nice, regular, rhythmic massage of breathing out, relaxing, breathing out, relaxing, right? First half, relaxation and stability. And then at your leisure, you don't need to count the minutes, when you feel like it. Then direct your attention to the space of the mind, whatever arises. Same quality of awareness in both. The still, unwavering mindfulness, observing the movements within the body, the still, unwavering mindfulness, observing the movements in the mind. So in that way, very similar. And so I call that balancing earth and wind. Earth as in the body, the somatic, the tactile, and where earth element is pretty prominent. It's kind of grounded, it's soothing, it's calming. And then facing into the wind of the thoughts, memories, emotions, and so forth. And if you do have that sense of ease, that sense of relaxation, then you have a better chance of not being blown away, being carried away by every thought, memory, and so forth that comes up. Okay? Okay, that's our strategy. So please find a comfortable position. We'll have one silent session.